We really do welcome it. I think one of the important things that came out of the report today was that the committee said that the subject should be renamed Relationships and Sex Education, with an emphasis, particularly at a primary level, on relationships education. But what we really want to do is to work with parents, with communities, to establish teaching which is in line with what they would want, but is aimed at keeping children and young people safe.
And Katie Ivens, if I can bring you here, doesn't that sound reasonable to you?
I really would love to know how you're going to work with the communities to get, to do what it is that communities want. I have no idea how you're going to go about that. But I do think you need to be very careful, particularly with young children, and how they respond to having, sex education, frankly, thrust upon them, which is what happens. I mean, normally when you bring up a child as a parent, you answer your child's questions, and that's really the way to do it, ideally. By the end of primary education, you might want them to have some idea of how babies are born, but you can thrust this sort of thing at children much too early. You can get very adverse reactions. I have actually had first-hand experience of adverse reactions. I've known of really nice little boys violating a little girl behind the bike sheds. I've known children pre-internet pornography actually getting themselves, paper pornography on paper, if you like, when they were quite young, and doing, pornographic drawings under the table, this sort of thing. So the idea that because you do it at school, this is going to be a good thing, I think this is something we've got to be really wary of, and we really do need to be sensitive to what parents feel about it. It really is parents' responsibility, especially relationships.
Diana, what age do you think children should be introduced to sex education?
I think it's about age-appropriate sexual education. So for very young children to be able to tell what their body parts are, to understand what is private from an extremely early age, yes, probably as early as 5 or 6. Having been a former criminal prosecutor, I've seen young children who weren't able to understand what consent meant, didn't able to explain what actually happened to them when they were violated. And I've seen a lot of injustice on that front. So what this program is about, the government wants to implement, is age appropriate. This is not a sex manual. That's not what this is about. This is about creating awareness. That's what we do with the RAP project. We create awareness about these issues because the reality of it is young people are learning about sex on the internet.
So for example, what would you tell a 5 or 6-year-old?
Well, you describe the body parts, you name them normally. This is a penis, this is an anus, and this is your private parts, and you're not supposed to have them touched, and you should explain what consent is. That is a very healthy, in my opinion, what I want my children to be aware of, so that no one does ever violate them. Because having been a prosecutor, I saw many children. Just because we want to pretend these things don't go on doesn't mean they're not going to happen.
What's wrong with doing that?
No, I think what you're saying actually is perfectly reasonable if you do it in a sensitive way. That is perfectly reasonable.
Well,
but I suppose what I'm talking
designing
about...
Designing a curriculum would be designed, presumably, to do it in a sensitive way.
I think... whether things are actually done in a sensitive way, it really depends on a lot of factors, whether they really are. And I mean, it may be that once you've got everybody doing this, it's going to end up being done in a most insensitive way. And if it was really done in a sensitive way, maybe, yes. I mean, nothing wrong with naming body parts. But, moving on to actual sex education, there's a great sort of lobby now for what you might call sexuality education, which gets very complex. We recently had these Ofsted inspectors who were questioning 11-year-old girls about whether they knew what lesbians actually did to each other and things like that. There is so much inappropriate that's going on, and you open the door to all this once you make sex and relationships education compulsory.
Once you turn on the internet, the door's open. So we've got a choice here. Either we as adults, we take responsibility and we empower our young people in this area, or we just keep on pretending that if we talk about it, then it's going to create more of an issue. It won't. It's going to help.
And it could go the other way around when you talk about it.
That's a very good point
much worse.
that Diana makes there, because it should be sex education for the 21st century. Children now face a whole plethora of risks they didn't face before. There's internet porn, social media, and also we've had these recent scandals about grooming gangs as well.
Absolutely, and that's what we want to do. We want to keep children and young people safe, and that's about delivering these lessons with trained teachers. And the big challenge at the moment is that these lessons are not delivered by trained teachers often. They're delivered by a maths teacher or a science teacher who's teaching it as a second subject. Those teachers feel uncomfortable, the children and young people feel uncomfortable. I'm sure the parents would feel uncomfortable about that as well. And that's why we need change from government, and that's what this report is calling for. By calling for statutory status, this committee is saying that we need trained teachers delivering this in every classroom across the country and consulting with parents as well.
The report that they've issued actually found no connection reported no connection between sex education and, for example, in reduction in teenage pregnancies, for example.
Which have gone down, as I understand it.
Well, they're pretty high,
Yeah,
relatively
they are
high.
dropping
They're dropping a bit, but they found no research, no connection between the activity, the sex education, and the reduction in teenage, or the rate, shall we put, of teenage pregnancies.
Could I come in on that? I mean, I think it's really important to say that the evidence that they did find suggested that children and young people who have this education actually have their first sex later as a result of that education. High quality sex and relationships education delivered by trained teachers actually the evidence suggests the children and young people who have that education will have sex later. So actually what we're doing is delaying that. We're not sexualising children at all.
There's also evidence, it reported in the report, that children who get a good education actually do it later too. And that is probably the factor.
But the people who wrote the report, Conservative and Labour MPs, looked at all of the evidence and they said that this subject should be on the national curriculum.
If I'd been on the committee, I wouldn't have agreed with them.
The problem with leaving all this to parents is, first of all, that not all parents are good parents. Indeed, we know that some abuse takes place within families. I mean, the majority of abuse takes place. But secondly, you may not like this, but new social norms are being established all the time. And, for example, gay marriage is now something which exists, which didn't exist a year or so ago. And in a sense, it's important in the interest of the children that they are aware of what the current lines are in society, because otherwise they might get into trouble.
When you talk to very young children, I'm particularly concerned about primary age children, they have great sensitivities about all sorts of things, and there are all sorts of things that actually they don't want to know. And if you shove it in their faces, they will sometimes have adverse reactions. I mean, I have witnessed this sort of thing happening, and ideally you want to attune what you say to the children, to their maturity and to their readiness. When you teach whole classes of children, you can't do that. You teach them all the same thing, all at the same time. And they may not be ready for it, and you can get adverse reactions.
You can say that about anything. You say maths or English, that not all children learn at the same rate or intellectually mature enough to read certain texts. So you can say that about anything. It's also getting parents involved, getting the community involved. That's what we do at the RAP Project. We work with faith-based schools, Church of England schools, and we talk to the parents about their cultural sensitivities and the maturity of that age. And that's very important that we need to do, but we cannot ignore that the world has changed greatly when it comes to sex, and we need to do something to help these kids.